Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Anomaly Sea Ice Challenge with the transhumanist Paragons of Pandroth. Last time we left off, after successfully rescuing Naseem from the Labyrinth, our sea ice base meanwhile was attacked by flesh beasts from the pit gate, which we promptly cleared out and collapsed, and our two psycasters Light and Elpis found themselves in a bit of a pickle, hallucinating due to a psychic drone and under attack from Sightstealers. In his efforts to protect the still hallucinating Elpis, Light here has suffered some wounds that would normally be fatal. As a sanguophage, however, he is deathless and therefore just falls into an involuntary death rest. He also loses some social skill XP, but I think we can live with that. The most important thing at this point is of course that he survives. While we take a brief look at what's going on in our home base, we then get the great message that Elpis has finally snapped out of his hallucinations, so not only will he now immediately use his coagulate ability on his mentor, he is also going to carry Light into the safety of their small shelter. While he does, we can also briefly take note of the Shamblers that also arrived last episode, although I think we should have a much easier time avoiding them. Eventually then, we probably also want to destroy the defoliator ship, especially with its protectors now disabled, but let's take things one step at a time. For now I think Light has earned himself some rest. Back home on the sea ice meanwhile, some of our lifter bots are clearing out some of our more dangerous entities from one of our holding facilities, which now finally gives us the chance to upgrade this fourth containment chamber with plasteel walls too. Unfortunately though, that plan is quickly interrupted by a drop pod raid. Luckily not right on top of us, and luckily the Itakin inside will also prepare for a while. Nonetheless, as you can see, there's quite a few of them, 44 to be exact, and we currently have a glaring hole in our exterior wall. So how about we call in some backup? A Diabolus, or in this case 2, will do. Our lifter bots, who are currently rushing back to the base, thankfully remain unharmed. However, as we prepare to close off our walls, things once again go from bad to worse. Looks like the Sightstealer threat is not over yet. Well, at least this time we can thankfully just lock ourselves in. A quick vertigo pulse ensures that we are not followed, and then we lock the door behind us to think of a plan. Back home, we get on with the wall construction as the mechs arrive. A group this big should have little trouble taking on 44 Itakin, and they have landed pretty close to the pirates too. Our containment chamber then closed off again, so nobody can just walk into our base. Instead, we send Vulek out of it, with the intent of luring the two enemy groups closer to each other. And while both the Itakin as well as the mechs quickly start closing in on him, after jumping away again they also quickly lose interest. Just a few seconds later, however, the mechs officially begin their assaults way before the Itakin do, and that inevitably gets them moving closer to the pirates. So, in just a few moments the fight will be on. It will most likely be another beautiful slaughter, although there is potential there for this to get a bit interesting, as all but one of the Itakin are equipped with melee weapons, and as we have seen over the course of this series, defending against those is not necessarily the mechanoid's strong suit. Just as the battle then reaches its apex, we are interrupted by two messages. First, Naseem has made progress studying the Noctosphere and has once again discovered its instability. And second, a combat supplier caravan has made its way over to us, where us in this case are our psycasters, which unfortunately also means that they will most likely soon be running into Sightstealers. I suppose we'll have to see how they fare against them. The Itakin meanwhile doing a very good job taking down Diabolus number 1 and 2. Their numbers however are dwindling fast, and so it is no surprise to see them fleeing shortly after. To clean up the remaining mechs, we then deploy the Noctosphere, and just as we do, we are then informed of the already expected Sightstealer sighting, and well, let's just say it's a bit more than the 4 that Elpis spotted earlier. This here, a group of almost 90 individuals, and even at a 500% threat scale, that is a lot, considering that this colony consists of only 2 pawns and has a wealth of roughly 30,000. A wealth of roughly 300,000 meanwhile is fast approaching for our sea ice base. As you can see, the Noctosphere is taking a good amount of damage, but also dishes out its fair share of punishment, and at this point, even if it goes down, we should be able to clear out the rest of the mechs ourselves. Still, it does eventually dispatch of all of them, which is actually a bit of a problem, because it still has about 20 seconds left of its onslaught mode, and in this mode it does not discriminate between friend or foe. This leads to Lifterbot Frelock being quickly vaporized, and with 10 seconds left the Noctosphere then skips itself towards our base. Luckily though, it does not reach it before its rampage comes to an end, and so we can now strap it back onto the holding platform for later use. While all of this was going on, by the way, we have constructed a small mechanical lab, including a subcore rib scanner, a brand new gadget. Before we can dive deeper into it, however, we are approached by another mysterious drifter. Unlike Nightshade or Kojiro, this one does not possess any obvious void-related talents. She is a hussar though, and as such very capable in combat. In her health tab then, her more or less unique talent is then also revealed to us. She is capable of refusing death a grand total of 4 times. This could potentially be very useful. No surprise then, just like Nightshade and Kojiro before her, she asks to join us, and also just like the two of them, she does possess a dark secret. Nonetheless, I think we will welcome her into our ranks. Her death refusal ability actually synergizes fantastically well with the new subcore rib scanner. I'll show you why in just a moment. Accepting her into the colony, of course, also means that we get to hand out another name from the list of patron supporters in the naming rights tier and above. So we welcome Shadow into our ranks, a name that is definitely mysterious in itself. Let's hope that whatever downside she carries is not going to be a major threat. For now at least, after putting on some new clothing, Shadow is firing up the subcore rib scanner. The material cost for this is identical to the subcore soft scanner, 50 steel and 4 components. What is definitely not identical, however, is what happens to the pawn inserted into the machine. While the soft scanner just inflicts a scanning sickness, the rib scanner straight up kills a pawn. At least it does if the pawn is incapable of death refusal, which granted most of them are. For Shadow, however, death is not more than a minor inconvenience, at least the first 4 times. So we are now going to use her to produce some high subcores, the most powerful of the 3 subcores in the game, used to, very fittingly, also create the most powerful mechanoids. While that is going on, we also slightly overhaul our slave and prison quarters. The goal here is to fit a second fabrication bench in there. The rib scanning procedure, however, only takes a few moments, resulting in a very valuable high subcore and in Shadow lying dead on the ground. But not for long, let's have her self-resurrect, a procedure that perhaps is reminiscent of the Shambler creation process. However, at the end of it, Shadow will be back just the way she was before, a regular human being, albeit one that will suffer from death refusal sickness for the next 24 hours. Apart from a minor consciousness penalty, however, this will be hardly noticeable. Let's jump back to our psycasting outpost, where we will now force Light awake again. Interrupting his death rest comes with penalties to consciousness moving and manipulation, but if we want to get rid of these 70 or so Sightstealers who probably still remain, then we need him up on his feet and meditating as quickly as possible. So while Light raises his psi focus, we use the high subcore to gestate a brand new type of mechanoid, a paramedic. As the name already suggests, a mech focused on treating the sick and wounded. It does have a few other useful abilities too that we'll get into later. One of its major advantages is its usefulness against metal horrors. As a mechanoid, a paramedic can of course not be infected, and thus will never lie about surgery results. Just as Mechanitor Lauren initiates the gestation process, Volek finds an underground plasteel deposit, and not just that, we also receive a very interesting quest. Yes, we would need to take in 11 prisoners suffering from paralytic abasia, but we could obtain rewards worth roughly 16,000 silver. That is, if we can also defeat the 2 mech clusters that will be deployed as part of this quest. Definitely a case of high risk, high reward if you ask me, but I am asking you, what do you think about it? Should we accept this, or should we play it safe and leave this quest be? At this point, I also realized that 10 minutes into the episode, we have barely completed one single in-game day. Apologies for that, I usually like to keep the progress flowing, but as you saw, there was just a whole lot going on in this first half. Moving on then, we attempt to get Kojiro's construction skill up to level 6. At that point, we can turn him into a production specialist, and the quality improvement from that role does apply to arts, so over the next few days we'll have him work on a few armchairs. We also receive a rather unnerving message at this point. Looks like the sky is dimming. This is something that we have not yet experienced, so we will soon have to spend a few moments lighting up our base. First of all though, study of the Dead Life Dust project complete, and as you can see we are approaching full completion of the Anomaly tech tree. Up next I think we'll explore the 3 serums, and I think we'll go with Mind Numb Serum first. Stabilizing a person's mood and preventing mental breaks, that strikes me as rather useful, especially considering how those mental breaks put us in a bit of a pickle at the end of the last episode. And speaking of mental breaks, our prisoner Carlos has once again gone berserk. Considering his number of injuries, however, we are not going to send the full ghoul police in for this one. Midnight alone is probably the safer bet if we want to keep Carlos alive. We are also slightly overhauling our storage room. Since all of the mechanoid machines have moved elsewhere, we now have a bit of room. And again, wherever possible, the construction experience goes to Kojiro. We are then also once again warned that the darkness is imminent, so we are now installing some lights to illuminate the base exterior. The Anomaly veterans among you will probably already notice one huge mistake here, and it is this one. The unnatural darkness is descending, but the sea ice is still brightly illuminated. Our small psycasting outpost, meanwhile, is an entirely different story. I'll be honest, I simply did not expect an event like this to strike such a small colony, but as you can see it has. A Noctolith has crashed down, and 2 more near the western edge of the map, and with that we have now discovered another new type of entity. The Noctolith is described here as another pillar-like structure. It is pulsing with dark architect energy, and I don't think it comes as too much of a surprise when I tell you that the unnatural darkness is fueled by these Noctoliths, which means we will need to destroy them to make the darkness vanish. However, with about 70 Sightstealers also still patrolling the map, most likely right in front of our base, that is easier said than done, which is why we are now going for the nuclear option, a Neuroquake, the ability that made Light famous in our previous playthroughs. However, it also puts him in a 5-day psychic coma. A few seconds later then, Elpis starts illuminating the base exterior with solar pinholes. I don't want to spoil anything, but you certainly do not want to get caught in the dark during this event. At the moment, it is most likely best if we don't step foot outside at all, as about 60 berserking Sightstealers are currently beating each other up right in front of our door. A few minutes later, Elpis manages to deliver a few pot shots against those few that survived, but of course we are not going to engage them any further. Instead, Elpis does his best to hold the door, while the Sightstealers thankfully quickly lose interest. All in all, definitely not a great situation to be in, not to mention that the Sightstealers are actually the least of our concerns at the moment. The biggest issue I see for Elpis at the moment is the imminent threat of another mental break, which is why we will now have him start another death rest. At the moment, I think that is the only way we can ensure that he stays locked inside. Back home, meanwhile, we receive another quest, one that speaks to our raider ideology. Taking out a camp of 14 wasters should not be too difficult, although we will most definitely put this on the back burner for now. Perhaps it's best if we solve one crisis at a time. The currently still unkillable Shadow then enters the subcore rip scanner for the second time, and a few hours later gets spit back out together with another high subcore. One more use of her self-resurrection ability gets Shadow back up on her feet, and I think we will do this at least once more once she has recovered from her sickness. Speaking of recovery, the genes of our Hussar prisoner Carlos have also finished regrowing, so half dead and with an infection spreading, we are stuffing him back into the gene extractor. After all, the shuttle to pick him up will arrive in just a few days, and I would like to maximize the time he spends with us. At this point, we also have a small group of traders pass by, which actually comes very much in handy, as we can grab some medicine and a reinforced barrel from them, in exchange for a whole lot of old weapons and clothing items, a big relief as we can finally clear up some storage space. In the morning, Lauren then frees our very first paramedic from the gestator, and named after the patron supporter of the same name, this one will now go by the name of Haha. Hopefully not the kind of noise it makes when it lets its patients die. For now at least, extracting a hemogen pack from Nightshade goes without issues. From Hussar prisoner Carlos, we then extract the Great Shooting gene pack, a gene pack that I believe we already have. A bit disappointing, but at least we end up making some money off of him. For our crafting slaves Shireen and Zamal, then a second fabrication bench is constructed. While their sleep schedules are currently staggered, there is still a bit of overlap, so this should hopefully slightly increase productivity. A Dark Visions mental break on Karen, meanwhile, reduces said productivity again, although thanks to her 2 drill arms, she has in fact exhausted the underground plasteel deposit we had her deep drilling, and with our supplies slowly dwindling, I moved her back to steel for the moment. Somewhat ironically then, despite repeatedly being beaten close to death, Carlos converts to the Paragons of Pandroth, a conversion that will of course not have any lasting impact as he is about to leave us in just 2 days, but it does give us one more ideology development point. At this point then, a quick change to our research efforts. We are looking to unlock skin hardening next, as the armor, stone and tough skin glands can actually be installed as implants on our ghouls, and that strikes me as more immediately useful than unlocking marine armor down the line. Now, one more person we should probably briefly talk about is the Sanguiphage we captured last episode, who now too is being converted to the Paragons of Pandroth by none other than our resident Sanguiphage Vulek. Unfortunately though, I'd say that our colony does not really have much of a use for him. Yes, he's only 15, but his skills and traits don't really intrigue me all that much. Not to mention that as soon as Light and Elpis return, we already have 3 Sanguiphages in the colony, and sustaining all of them with enough hemogen could get a bit tricky. Still, despite the fact that he technically attacked us last episode, I don't want to kick him out either. After all, as many of you correctly pointed out in the comments, we were the one who lured him here in the first place. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to harvest every single organ from him, including the bionic leg, and then we're going to turn him into a ghoul. Yeah, I know, this may seem awfully cruel, but a Sanguiphage ghoul actually has the potential to be very, very powerful. Not to mention that after the ghoul infusion, all of the missing organs will grow back anyway, and we can also still extract the Sanguiphage genes from him in the gene extractor. In my opinion, this is the best course of action for someone who, for gameplay purposes, I don't really want to keep around, but for storytelling purposes, I also don't want to kick out. Bad news then from our psycasters, as a grand total of about 400 thrombomeat have just rotted away in storage. That's the downside of a solar pinhole in confined spaces. The inside temperature is nice and cozy, and yeah, we probably could have removed a roof, but, well, you can't think of everything. It is also a relatively small problem compared to what happens next. You may have anticipated this already. The darkness itself is of course only one half of the threat. The other half are these guys, Noctols. Described as almost insect-like, Noctols thrive in darkness. During the unnatural darkness event, they are a frequent occurrence, and how dangerous they are largely also depends on whether or not they are fought in light or darkness, not that Light and Elpis are currently in any position to fight them in either one. So despite my initial plan being to have the 2 of them survive on their own, I think this situation calls for an emergency rescue team. Maniac, Vulek, Ellie and our ghoul Jay, and they're also bringing some chem fuel and a reinforced barrel for the construction of a mortar. The Noctols meanwhile have already made it over to our small outpost. They will not attack our 2 colonists here, but if we leave them to it, they will destroy the entire base. Despite his mood being at critical levels, we also have Elpis wake up from his death rest. At this point I think we need every helping hand. And don't forget, it's not just the 5 Noctols we're going to be fighting. We will very likely have some Sightstealers emerge from the shadows in just a few moments. Now for the Noctols themselves, a small group like this is not really much of a threat. When exposed to light, their movement speed is cut in half, and their attack speed is also drastically reduced. And there you can see it, as Elpis exits the small shelter to join his friends, the first Sightstealer reveals itself. Thankfully though, Elpis has a jump pack equipped, so he can quickly get himself out of dodge. Nonetheless, it is time to retreat a bit further with the rest of the group. We've got a nice natural choke point right near the anima tree here. And so, while we are notified that Nightshade failed a surgery on our Sanguiphage, let's hope that our 5 pawns here can hold that position. Boosted by Elpis's combat command, Maniac and Jay are dishing out a good amount of damage. The only problem is that, as you can see, we've got Sightstealers looping around the top here. Thankfully, they are fairly weak opponents individually, and most of them are still trying to get through the small hole in the wall. So, despite collecting a few scratches and bruises, the fight is going well for us. Problem is, and you may have seen this coming too, winning this fight is only just the beginning. Clearly, the darkness still persists, and with it, the threat of further Noctols appearing. Not to mention that the occasional Sightstealer is also still around. With this individual taken down then, we use Elpis's last bit of Psyfocus to cast one last solar pinhole, and then we send Maniac out to dig for components. 6 of them we need to construct a mortar. 3 we already possess, so the 4 we gain from here should be enough. Although the digging work is far from done, now Maniac also needs to carve out a small tunnel leading to the first Noctolith. Once the path is cleared, our team assembles, Elpis casts one more solar pinhole, and then it's time to attack. With full force, we are now trying to destroy this Noctolith. Doing so, however, calls a few more Noctols from the darkness. Thankfully, both Maniac and Ellie possess the stun psycast and also enough Psyfocus to cast it multiple times. And with only 3 Noctols engaging us here, this should be a winnable fight. So there we are, back to the Noctolith. As you can see, its destruction is not too lengthy of a process. However, this is also only number 1 of 3. Still, with it destroyed, the darkness is wavering, so we only need to do this twice more to get rid of it. Now, the problem at this point is that the other 2 Noctoliths are extremely far away, which is why, using the reinforced barrel we brought, Vulek is now constructing a mortar. As a reward for a quest we completed a while back, our small colony here was rewarded with 2 anti-grain warheads, one of which we can now plug into the mortar and then have it fire at the 2 Noctolith structures. And we also don't need to be overly accurate with this, both the damage and the blast radius should suffice no matter where we hit. And there we go. All 3 of the Noctoliths have been destroyed and the darkness is lifting. We certainly did get lucky with 2 of them being placed right next to each other here, but then again we also would have had a second warhead ready to be used. Now the destruction here prompts a final wave of Noctols, once again just 3 of them, so we should have little trouble taking them down. Now, apart from this incident, my plan of course has not changed. If at all possible, I would like to continue to leave Light and Elpis alone, so most likely one of the first things we'll do next episode is to rebuild that pod launcher to send Maniac, Ellie, Vulek and Jay back home. For today, meanwhile, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut. It was another eventful episode, but I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. As always, if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.